Thank you, everyone. So if you haven't already, as I mentioned, we will be using Poll Everywhere to interact with some of the presentations that we'll hear this afternoon. So if you haven't already, you can feel free to connect to Poll Everywhere. The easiest way is probably directly through your cell phone. So if you text Gwen's Girls 454 to the number on the screen 22333, you can connect, and so what you'll do is you'll text it, it'll give you a little message, and then once we start with the questions, you'll have some ABCD prompts, and you would simply type in that letter choice when we get to the question. So if you are interested in participating in the interactive poll, let's take a minute right now to text 22333 to Gwen's Girls 454. Okay, so seated before you are members of co-conveners of the work groups of our Black Girls Equity Alliance, and they'll be coming before you to talk a little bit about the work that's been happening in their work group. But before we start that, I do want to take a couple moments just to ground us in some context about the Black Girls Equity Alliance. So we've heard a lot this morning about Commander Gwendolyn J. Elliott. We know she is the impetus for this work and the reason that we're here this morning. We know that she was the first Black woman commander for the Pittsburgh Police, and she did recognize the lack of understanding of the complex needs of girls, and as a result of that work, started Gwen's Girls in 2002. And so the mission of Gwen's Girls is to empower girls and young women to have productive lives through holistic, gender-specific programs, education, and experiences, and the organization does employ a gender-responsive service delivery model, and you were able to see some of our beautiful girls this morning that opened our session today, and so that's just a glimpse of some of the work that happens on Gwen's Girls on a daily basis, and we know that Gwen's Girls is run by our fearless leader, Dr. Kathy Elliott. So why Black girls? I think we've talked a little bit about this today, and I don't think we can talk about it enough, but we know that nationally and locally, research and programming has ignored the plight of Black girls. And we also know the double threats of the racial and gender bias. I remember even myself, my mom saying, you know, as a Black woman, you have 2 strikes against you, so you have to be that much better, that much stronger, that much smarter. And we know that those things play out, and we heard the ways that they play out in the report, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into our session. And we also know that Black girls have holistic needs that must be affirmed, valued, and addressed. So, as a result, Gwen's Girls founded the Gwendolyn J. Elliott Institute in 2015 to support research and provide a training and clearinghouse for best practices around work that empowers young women and girls. And so the mission of the Institute is to provide that research and training. And you'll hear a little bit about some of the research and some of the reports that the Black Girl Equity Alliance has released, and there are also copies available for you. And if you did receive the logistics email last night, there were some electronic versions of those reports in there as well. So in 2016, the Inequities Report was released. It was commissioned by the FISA Foundation and the Heinz Endowment to draw some attention to the disparities that Black girls face in this region, and it was actually presented at the first Equity Summit in 2016, and from there, the Black Girls Equity Alliance was formed. So the Black Girls Equity Alliance is a combination of stakeholders that come together to address disparities that Black girls face. And I know a lot of you represent organizations or individuals who are part of the Black Girls Equity Alliance. So if you are, just go ahead and wave your hand. Some of our Black Girl Equity Alliance members, we appreciate you and the work that you do in the work groups on a regular basis. And there are 4 work groups of the Black Girl Equity Alliance. There's the Education Work Group, the Juvenile Justice Work Group, the Child Welfare Work Group, and also the Health and Wellness Work Group. And so that's all I will say in terms of context. I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Amanda Cross. She is the co-convener of the Education Work Group, and she will lead us through our first update. She'll be followed by Dr. Sarah Goodkind and Kim Booth, who are co-conveners of the Juvenile Justice Work Group, Angela Steele, who is the co-convener of the Child Welfare Work Group, and finally, Dr. Brittany Brinkman, who is the co-convener of the Health and Wellness Work Group. At the end, we will take questions, so we're going to allow them to go all the way through their presentations. You have your note cards on the table, so if something strikes you as you hear, please write it down, and then once Dr. Brinkman finishes the final report out, we'll be around to collect those questions and have a short discussion before we break for lunch. So let's welcome them as they come.
So thank you, Elise, and I am Amanda Cross. I've been convening the education work group since we started it out after the 2016 summit, and I'm also a research evaluation manager at the Office of Child Development. So what I'm going to present on today is kind of the pathway that our advocacy work has taken over the past several years related to prevention of sexual harassment of Black girls. And the education work group isn't only dedicated to sexual harassment prevention, but it has been the bulk of our energy and time, and so that will be the subject today. So the origin of the group started after the first Equity Summit, and it wasn't called BGEA quite yet, but we were similar in structure, and after that we noticed a lot of energy and a lot of real drive to do more, motivation to help inequities where we saw them, and divided into these 4 work groups that are here now. The early meetings of the education work group were large. We had many community members come in, many organizations were represented. I didn't count, but more than 100 folks came to those early meetings. They're all bringing perspectives and concerns, issues that they raise about Black girls in the educational context. But the issue that really rose to the top was about school safety, knowing that school isn't always a safe place for Black girls to be, and thinking of ways that we can help remedy that and support around those school safety concerns. And one thing that stuck out to us, the adults in the group, was cyberbullying. We knew that there was social media harassment happening that could spill over into school conduct that could then be punished with exclusionary discipline and therefore causing rifts and bad relationships between students and schools. So one of our members held focus groups with girls to talk to them about those issues, to find out how cyberbullying affects them, and about school safety in general. And they did tell us that online harassment was a problem, but really what they told us was that sexual harassment was a bigger problem. And they don't use that language, they don't say sexual harassment, but they're talking about unwanted touching and comments that are happening in schools from staff and from peers. And so we changed directions at that point, and we really solidified around our advocacy issue of prevention of sexual harassment. So now I'd like to test out the poll survey. I can find it. Oh, okay, I guess we're going to skip the poll questions, but that's fine. The questions were related to how many of us have personal experiences with sexual harassment. So if you've had jokes or gestures of a sexual nature made about you in an unwanted, unwelcome way, can we do maybe a show of hands? People that have heard sexual comments and unwanted jokes about them and their sexuality? That's a lot of us. And the same is, we could ask it about sexual assault as well, but since this isn't an anonymous form anymore, but we'll just suffice it to say that it's a very common experience to be touched in an unwelcome sexual way in school settings. So we built a coalition now knowing that our advocacy work would be around preventing sexual harassment and that it was an issue personal to many of us. And we knew that within our region there was a lot of expertise and organizations and individuals that had a long and rich experience and expertise in issues related to sexual health and women's issues. And so we set out to build a coalition around our advocacy, starting with community members, parents, and those themselves who had been subject to sexual harassment in school, and also youth. We've always brought youth in when we could to get their voices and perspective. And this was a youth-driven topic because we did respond to the needs of youth when we heard them. And so they've always been central to our work. There are legal advocacy groups here, the Education Law Center and the Women's Law Project, who have been instrumental in guiding us as we learn the legalities around Title IX and what isn't legal in the educational context and how to advocate for those laws and those regulations to be enforced. And then sexuality health organizations, Planned Parenthood and Pittsburgh Action Against Rape have been instrumental in guiding us through the entire process since we started working on sexual harassment issues. And we've been fortunate to have membership from local universities be highly involved as well, from Pitt to CMU to Carlow to Chatham to Point Park, Robert Morris. We've had many representatives from universities be a part of this effort over the years. So after we had been together as a coalition for about a year, we did our first public action, raising community awareness of issues related to sexual harassment, and that was at a school board meeting for Pittsburgh Public Schools in May of 2018. There was about 15 of us who testified at that point. We were lucky enough to receive some media coverage from that action, including an interview with Dr. Hamlet, who expressed, he's the superintendent at PPS, he expressed some skepticism that the facts that we reported about sexual harassment, its prevalence and its impact applied to Pittsburgh because the studies that we were citing were not actually conducted on Pittsburgh public school students. So we do have some evidence now about that. There's been a survey conducted about sexual harassment among adolescents regionally, and that will be presented in breakout sessions tomorrow. So details on that will be available at that point. But we were ultimately invited to participate with Pittsburgh Public Schools in an effort that we thought would be a genuine collaboration where we could work together with the expertise of our group and with the administration of Pittsburgh Public to find a way to educate students and teachers about preventing sexual harassment and really a culture change. Knowing how prevalent sexual harassment is, it's not going to be easily remedied with small measures. So we anticipated a years-long process with evaluation and comprehensive education for students and staff and policy changes, but it came quickly obvious that Pittsburgh Public was looking to do a one-off training for a select number of staff, and we didn't feel like that would make a meaningful difference for girls in school, and we backed away from the process at that point. And then we adapted. So we knew that among our group we had a lot of expertise and that we had a lot to offer and a lot to share. So we've created 2 recommendations documents. One is related to Title IX, and we've had some help from Title IX coordinators at local universities to help us really craft recommendations on how policies should be in place, how complaints can be lodged, how investigations should be run, and how situations can be remedied, often without really punitive responses. It's often counseling for perpetrators or maybe just a change in classrooms that can be accomplished to really help girls feel more safe, to stop sexual harassment victimization, and also without a punitive response to those who may be perpetrating, to really educate them and hope that they can go forward with healthier behaviors. So those are, and the sexual harassment prevention plan talks about educating students, educating teachers, aligning protocols with policies. Many school districts have great policies related to non-discrimination, but they're not enforced. So to find ways to make sure that the enforcement policies, the enforcement and the policies align, and also the importance of bringing in external providers to do training. Those folks are the experts. We don't want schools to make up things on the fly on their own. We want them to be relying on people who do this work for a living and who know the ups and downs of sexual harassment prevention. So moving forward, we're always building the coalition. We always want folks who are interested and have energy and want to work on issues related to sexual harassment of Black girls to join us and be part of this effort. And we're especially seeking partnerships with schools and administrators, those who work in schools, teachers, social workers, support staff, anybody who is working in K through 12 settings are especially welcome to join, because really we need more of those folks and their perspective as we go forward in this work, particularly because we are going to be starting a new campaign about educational quality for Black girls. And some of that was mentioned in the earlier report about Black girls not having as much access to advanced classes. And so we'll be looking at those kind of issues, doing a survey of what the landscape is for educational quality for Black girls in this region in the future. So we also welcome people to join us as we do that. Thank you.
So before we move forward, I do want to take a second and see if we can troubleshoot our poll everywhere questions, because they are an integral part of the presentation. So let's just see if we can figure that out. I will not belabor this, but let's see if we can figure this out really quickly. And it looks like they all have disappeared. so it looks like they're back. So I'm just gonna, so these were, looks like a couple people maybe responded. So the first question that Dr. Cross had was about how often has someone made unwelcome sexual comments, jokes, or gestures about you? If the answer is never, you can type A, a few times B, many times C. And so this is just an opportunity for us to weigh in, and, we know that, given the prevalence of sexual harassment, that, a few to many times seems to be, the rate at which we experience that. So I'm sorry, Dr. Cross, that the poll did not work. Fingers crossed that it works for everyone else. And I think she had one more question. So let's see this one. How often has someone touched you in an unwelcome or sexual way? A, never, a few times, many times. And it looks like, again, a few times to many times are prevalent, just given the occurrence of sexual harassment that occurs around our schools and just in general. So hopefully the poll questions will work as we continue out through our presentation. So we'll go ahead and skip ahead to our juvenile justice work group, and Dr. Goodkind and Kim Booth will be up to share some updates about that work group.
Thanks, Elise. I'm going to start us out, and then you'll hear from Kim Booth in just a minute. So as it shows on this slide, the focus of our presentation on the work of the Juvenile Justice Work Group is on understanding and interrupting pathways to juvenile justice for Black girls in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. I know that often when people think about the juvenile justice system, they think about boys, but overall in the U.S., girls account for 27% of referrals to juvenile justice. So there are a lot of girls involved with juvenile justice. And we want to start by telling you why we're focusing on the pathways into juvenile justice, which you'll hear us calling often referrals to juvenile justice. You heard already in this presentation about how the Black Girls Equity Alliance got started. At the first Equity Summit 4 years ago when we were here at Pitt, again, we presented findings from our first report that was focused on the inequities affecting Black girls in our region. And one finding in this report was that Black girls were 11 times more likely than white girls to be referred to juvenile justice in Allegheny County. And this was collaborative work, and we pulled data from a lot of places, but I was the one who calculated this statistic for the report. And I calculated it based on looking at total numbers of referrals and population size. And I have to say that when I did it, I double-checked my work, I triple-checked my work, because I knew we would find racial disproportionality, but I didn't know that it would be this extreme. Overall in our country, Black girls are about 3 times more likely than white girls to be referred to juvenile justice. Also really troubling and problematic, but not as extreme as it is here. And as we looked further into this, we saw that in Allegheny County, Black girls are referred at a higher rate to juvenile justice than Black girls nationally, than the national average, at the same time that here in Allegheny County, white girls are referred at a lower rate than the average for white girls nationally. The other thing that we were able to do in that report was to compare juvenile justice referral rates with girls' self-reported behaviors here in Allegheny County. And we were fortunate to have the Healthy Allegheny Teen Survey data to do this. And what this showed us was that the racial disproportionality in referrals could not be explained by girls' behaviors. And we put just 2 examples up on this slide. So we know that Black girls are about twice as likely as white girls to report being involved in a physical fight, but they are 13 times more likely to be referred to the juvenile justice system for assault. Similarly, rates of alcohol and drug use among Black and white girls in our county are almost exactly the same, and yet Black girls are 3 times more likely than white girls to be referred to juvenile justice for a drug offense. So if girls' behaviors don't explain these disproportionate referral rates, what does? As documented by Kimberly Crenshaw in her Black Girls Matter report, by Monique Morris in Push Out, and by Jamelia Blake and her colleagues in their work on the adultification of Black girls, we know that Black girls experience specific forms of marginalization that ignore their unique vulnerabilities, that punish them for defending themselves and for standing up to injustice, and that criminalize their survival strategies. In the next 2 days, we will all get to hear from all 3 of these incredible scholars whose work is pictured up here and learn more about what their research has revealed about these processes. But for now, we're going to just tell you a little bit more about the work that our work group has been doing here. So since we know that the disproportionate referrals to juvenile justice were not because of girls themselves, we've turned our attention to systemic factors. And since then, our work group has been focused on learning about where the referrals come from and how we might reduce the high rate of referrals of Black girls to juvenile justice in our county through systemic intervention. And so we've been looking at addressing the racial disproportionality in referrals of girls to juvenile justice, and we started by looking at local data to understand the neighborhoods from which and the offenses for which Black girls are referred. And now Kimberly Booth is going to tell you more about these next steps.
Hello. Okay, Kathy keeps making me do this. I just want to put that out there. My name is Kimberly Booth. I'm with Allegheny County Juvenile Probation. I'm the Assistant Chief Probation Officer for Juvenile Court. So Sarah talked a lot about the reasons for our group looking at referral. So on the continuum, we started to focus specifically on referral to the court system. And what we found out was that people over and over again started to ask every group, they would ask us, you know, what are the numbers? Where are the offenses? What are the neighborhoods? What was the race? What was the age? So what we thought was, because we kept over and over again getting some of the same type of questions, we was able to secure some funding from the FASA Corporation, FASA Foundation, and they were able to help us develop this dashboard that you see up front. I encourage people to take a look at it because it's juvenile court sort of opening up its world, and people can see for themselves where youth actually are, where offenses are based on race and gender. Up here, what you see is some of the definitions that I think when you go on the dashboard, you need to understand. So here's a 10-second trivia. What age does juvenile court have the jurisdiction to? That's for y'all. What age does juvenile court have jurisdiction to? And the judge, nope, Anthony. Anthony's a probation officer. He tried to put his hand up. Nope, no. So, I'm sorry? 21, good answer, everybody. Good answer. I think that people are very, don't take the time to really find out clear information. I feel like there's a lot of conceptions that are mixed and confused, summary offenses, felony offenses. I won't take that time to do that here today, but I want to make sure you all take a look at this and see that dashboard because it was really being transparent about the work that we do here in Allegheny County. So here you see the map. This is just one to give you a snapshot. Melanie King did this last year at our conference, and she talked a little bit about some of these numbers and what they meant. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what that looks like. So what you see here is a circle, and this circle represents people that talked about attitudes, their experiences with juvenile court, and they have direct experiences with young people and girls of color specifically, and they talked about what that looks like. So we brought people into our meetings so that we could have a more intimate dialogue about what it was they were really seeing day to day so that we could talk about youth and girls of color in real text versus it seems like or I'm not sure. So here we have one of our first questions. Now I know I shouldn't be running this clicker. All right, here we go. Black girls are how many more times likely than white girls to be arrested by Pittsburgh police? Can they see it? It's on the next slide though, right? Oh. So there you go. Black girls are how many more times arrested? 13. So I know it's much higher than what most people think, but it's a very important number that you need to understand. What % of black girl referrals to juvenile justice in Allegheny County were school-related offenses? Okay. 60%. A little bit shocking.
And tell them this part about, I'll tell 'em. Well, and this question didn't ask you this, but for white girls, it's just 38% of their referrals are for school-related offenses. And all of this information is in the report that we'll show you in a sec. We have one more question for you.
Pittsburgh Public Schools have a higher rate of referrals of black girls to law enforcement than what % of similar U.S. cities? I think y'all been reading the report. You shouldn't have got that right. That's right, D, 99%.
And what that means, and this is in the gender equity report, is that Pittsburgh has a higher rate of school referrals of black girls to law enforcement than every other city in that list. So, yes, we have a new report that has this information and much more, and it shows you where the data came from, and you can learn a lot more about what's happening here in our county, and it also has some recommendations. Oh, yeah.
Wait, they did come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here are just a few of them, but there are a bunch more in the report, and even that is not necessarily exhaustive. What we want is for you all to join us in this work, and the ways that you can do that. Join us at lunch at our table. I think we're going to have tables based on different work group areas. You can also sign up to get emails and attend our work group meetings. Our next meeting is going to be in October, and we're going to be meeting with some school principals and other administrators to talk to them more about what's happening in the schools and how we can work together to address these things. Anything else? That's it.
Good morning. My name is Angela Steele. I'm a Diversity and Inclusion Officer with the Department of Human Services, and my work has focused mainly in child welfare around racial equity. So the work with BGEA really coincides with the work that's already happening within our system. Back in 2014, child welfare has taken on the task of looking at our system and what institutional and structural racism is occurring and causing inequities. So today I'll talk about what we've been doing within our system and where we're going from here in some ways that BGEA can help us to further our efforts. So when we took a look at our system, we are taking a data-driven approach, and we're looking at different decision points along the child welfare continuum and focusing on 5 different points so that we can track our progress. We're looking at who is being referred to our system, who is being investigated by child welfare, who is being accepted for services, who is being removed from their home, and where they're being placed once they're removed. Allegheny County's child population of black girls accounts for 8.3% of the total population. However, in child welfare, black girls are 20% of our referrals, 22% of our investigations, 24% of our accepted cases, and 25% of our removals from home. What this means is that black girls are represented in our system at 2.5 to 3 times their representation in our population. Some of the work that we've done to alleviate racial disparities, we've taken a multi-pronged approach. So there's lots of different efforts at hand. I'll just highlight some of the big ones. We have commitment from our leadership within DHS and CYF, and this is really important. Without the commitment from our leadership, we wouldn't be able to be as transparent with our data. We're really just putting it out there, and we're asking for your feedback. We've established an equity and inclusion office within Department of Human Services to focus on these issues. And again, we've done analysis of our system data. And with that analysis, we didn't want to just keep it to ourselves. We've been disseminating it. So we're giving it to our staff, to our cross-system partners, to our community members, and really being transparent with what is happening in our system. We've developed the Child Welfare Leadership Program, and this is important because the first year of the leadership program focused on placement and outcomes for Black girls. We had found that Black girls have the worst outcomes at every step in placement, and really were able to create interventions to make that a little bit better. We've trained all of our staff in racial equity. We wanted to establish a common understanding and a common language around what institutional racism is, how to recognize it, and what we can do to change it. We're reviewing and changing policy internally that's influencing racial disparities. We've implemented a system-wide conferencing and teaming, which is our casework practice. And this is a much more collaborative practice where the family is able to set their goals and set the ways that they want to address goals. We've enhanced a partnership with our kinship care provider, a second chance, to be able to bolster kinship care numbers. And kinship care is placement with a relative or a family friend. In Allegheny County, we consider anyone that has a relationship with that child or family to be kin. You do not have to be a relative. We've had a few campaigns around diligent recruitment, specifically for foster homes for our teens. And we have congregate care strike teams. Congregate care is what you would think of as group homes. We know that placement in group home is the last option that we would want to take. There are no positive outcomes from a placement in congregate care, so we should be avoiding those at all costs. Not all costs. And then we set a strategic plan specifically to reduce the number of African American teenage girls whose first placement was congregate care. So back in 2013, which is the year before we started doing this work, we placed 74% of our Black girls in congregate care as their first placement. What do you think that the system looks like today? Is it A, 74% still, we haven't been able to change it? B, 52% are still going to congregate? C is 42, and D is 30%. Oh, that's interesting. All right, so I won't keep you in suspense. Through a concerted effort, we've been able to decrease that number to 30%. So this really shows what you can do when you focus on Black girls. Another important aspect is increasing our kinship care. So back in 2013, we only placed 15% of our Black girls with kin for their first placement. What do you think that looks like now? 15, 27, 30, or 53%? I should have started with this when the congregate gave it away. So yes, we are now placing 53% of our girls with kin. That's more than a triple the amount that we did before. And last one, if we aren't able to place with kin, we do want to place in a family home. So we place in what we consider foster care. And back in 2013, we were placing about 11% of our Black teen girls in foster care. What do you think the system looks like now? I'll cut it off there. I guess we tricked you. So this is the one area that we have had improvement, but where we need to make much, much more improvement. This gives you a look at what the numbers look like over time. So the pink at the top is congregate care coming down. The orange is kinship care going up, and the very bottom line is our foster care. We see that 2017 is the first year where it crossed, that we're placing kids with kin first rather than congregate care. But we want the congregate care number to continue coming down. 30% is still way too high. And the way that we want to go about that is not only bolstering kinship care, but we also need foster care for our teen girls in particular. First placement is one measure to look at because we want first placement to be their only placement and never have to move. But if we cannot place with family on first placement, we continue looking for where they can go. So this is way back in 2012. And any day, if you looked at our system, this is what it looked like. So 39% of our Black girls remained in congregate care, 19% were in foster care, and 42% were in kinship care. Through focusing on Black girls, we've been able to decrease congregate down to 19 and increase kinship to 61%. Again, 19% is still too high, and we're seeing that our foster care numbers aren't moving, and we really want to focus on that. So some of the current work that's going on in CYF is regional office specific. In child welfare, there's 6 different regional offices, and they all serve a very different demographic of children. So we're breaking the data down to the regional office level and doing strategic planning around where we're finding disparities within that office. We're also doing community engagement work and cross-systems collaboration. We know that we can take a look at our system and try to fix the things that we think are wrong, but we also recognize that we need input and cooperation from the community to really be able to change our system. We need people to come to the table. I think it was said earlier that it's not just one system that's making these outcomes, so we need all of the systems to be on board. We're evaluating the efficacy of the DHS services. One thing that we found when we reviewed our data is that we are very likely to implement services for Black children. We're still highly likely to remove Black children from their homes. So we want to see what's happening with these services and whether there's community-based or grassroots organizations that would be better able to serve our families. And then transracial placement support is another one that has come up. And transracial, we mean, is a child who is placed in a home of a race that is not their own. And we do know that when we place with kin, we're placing about 95% of our children within race. But we do want to work on supports for those children who are not placed within their race, not just for the children, but also for the families, so that they can understand what the children experience, culture, things like that. So we're developing programming around that through a collaborative process with Gwen's Girls, the African American Strategic Partnership, and our foster care providers. So we need all of you to come on board and help give us your ideas, help us to point out where you think that improvements can be made, and I hope to see you on the BGEA work group. Thank you.
Hello. So my name is Brittany Brinkman, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at Point Park University, and I'm the co-convener of the Health and Wellness Working Group. Maya Angelou said, "My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style." The Black Girls Equity Alliance Health and Wellness Working Group is invested in creating and supporting the conditions that allow Black girls to thrive. We define health as more than the absence of illness. One of the conditions that we know can interrupt Black girls' thriving are experiences of trauma. Whether it's interpersonal violence, family disruption caused by poverty and mass incarceration, community violence, or institutional racism, too many of our Black girls are experiencing traumatic events early in life. Unfortunately, the systems in which Black girls interact, including our schools and healthcare systems, are rarely designed to recognize these experiences of trauma and respond in ways that support healing. In fact, we know that many Black girls are punished when their behavior reflects common symptoms of trauma, including sleepiness, difficulty concentrating in school, and irritability and anger. At the Black Girls Equity Alliance, we are working to transform these systems to integrate trauma-informed care for Black girls. We created the Pathways to Resiliency and Well-Being for Black Girls Who've Experienced Trauma professional learning community. In it, we bring together educators, practitioners, and individuals working with Black girls who who are invested in transforming their organizational practices. The Pathways PLC has 3 core beliefs. 1, Black girls in the Pittsburgh region are disproportionately impacted by poverty, overrepresented in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems, and report higher rates of violence and victimization than their white counterparts. 2, historical, political, and social factors have and continue to contribute to the traumatization of Black girls. And 3, educators and practitioners have an obligation to develop a nuanced understanding of the ways in which Black girls are impacted by trauma and must act in culturally responsive ways to provide advocacy and support. The Pathways PLC includes 3 days of in-person training and the development of a proposal to transform practices within the participants' own organization. 2 cohorts have already completed the PLC. Those who have participated so far have told us they've increased their organization's ability to do trauma-informed care and increased their self-awareness about Black girls' specific experiences of trauma. PLC members have created a number of proposals for change within their organizations. Their projects have focused on mentoring strategies for Black women, trauma-informed community lawyering, the inclusion of African American history and African culture into after-school programming, supporting the healthy sexuality of Black girls, creating inclusive schools, developing dialogues about race and equity and privilege, and so much more. We are so proud of the PLC members and the hard work that they are doing to transform their organizations to better serve Black girls. Many of the participants are here at the summit, and I'd invite you to just raise your hand if you've participated in one of the trauma PLCs. Yeah, a couple over here. I invite you to talk to some of the members to learn more about the ways that they are transforming their organizations. The Health and Wellness Group has also worked extensively on supporting the sexual and reproductive health of Black girls in our region. We are proud to announce the release of the new report, Black Girls and Sexuality Education, Access, Equity, and Justice. So you all saw this report out front this morning. The report documents the findings of a collaborative needs assessment conducted by the Health and Wellness Working Group to examine access to sexuality education in Pittsburgh and surrounding areas. Our report is rooted in a theoretical model of reproductive justice, which extends mainstream reproductive rights arguments to examine the socio-cultural context in which women engage in reproductive decision-making. Black girls and femmes have uniquely faced a history of violence and injustice regarding their reproductive rights in the United States. When we take a look at Black girls' experiences of sex education today, what we find is deeply lacking at best. Of the 25 U.S. states with the highest population of Black residents, only 11 mandate sex education, and of those, only 3 require that the information presented is medically accurate. We conducted the needs assessment to better understand what's happening here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. We gathered data from internal providers, the PE teachers, health teachers, and other school staff who teach sex education, and external providers, individuals working in organizations that offer sexuality education, in order to better understand what is happening in our area. We also conducted focus groups with Black girls and asked them to describe their experiences regarding sex education in school. What we found is that most providers are offering sex education in middle schools and high schools, with a very small percentage being offered in elementary school. The overall picture indicates that access to comprehensive sex education is inconsistent and non-systematic. Black girls in our focus groups voiced overall dissatisfaction with sex education in their school, and the problems that they raised mirror the data that we gathered from the providers, suggesting that there are a number of significant gaps in sexuality education in Pittsburgh area schools. Best practices in sex education recommend that providers use structured curricula that are based on existing evidence about what works, while being adaptive to the particular needs of that student body. Our report suggests that the use of up-to-date, evidence-based, and culturally appropriate curriculum is a weakness in our region. And schools with majority Black students and internal providers, the teachers, may be even less likely to have structured curriculum. When schools either do not have access to or are not required to use such curriculum, health teachers who are facing competing demands are tasked with preparing lessons regardless of their background and education in best practices regarding sex education. In the worst cases, this can lead to sexuality education that is not grounded in theory, that uses ineffective, even fear-based approaches, and that fails students in terms of delivering the information and skills practices that they need. In our report, we review 24 essential topics in sexuality education and the percentages of internal and external providers that include them. We found a number of gaps. For example, what percentage of providers do you think cover sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression topics? So A is 14% of internal and 45% of external. B is 85% of internal and 75% of external. C, 52% of internal and 70% of external, or D, 5% of internal and 9% of external. All right. The answer is C. 52% of the internal providers are including discussions of gender identity or sexual orientation, compared to 70% of our external providers. Many of our internal providers actually noted that they wanted more information and support to be able to effectively cover these topics. And students in our focus groups also expressed that this was a gap. The barriers described around SOGI topics are not unique to our region, with studies finding that abstinence-only and evidence-based comprehensive sexuality education often centers cisgender, heterosexual identities to the exclusion of LGBTQIA+ students. We know that internal and external providers are experiencing various barriers and challenges to offering comprehensive sex education in schools. We also know that access to comprehensive, culturally relevant, high-quality sexuality education is an important element in fostering the agency of Black girls and femmes to make decisions about their sexuality. We encourage all of you to read our report, and we invite you to work with us to ensure that Black girls receive the sex education they deserve.
Okay, let's give our co-conveners another round of applause. And we will go ahead and take a couple questions. So if you do have those questions written out on your index card, please hold them up and we'll be around to collect them. Because we're running short on time, I'll go ahead and start reading them. So, let's see. If, to some extent, disproportionate referrals are the root of racial disproportionality in the child welfare system, can interventions focused on institutional racism within CYF address that? If so, how? If not, what would? Thank you, Buck. I was just about to grab those. On it.
So that's a very good question. So institutional racism is both from external and internal. So our changes in internal practice can reduce what we're seeing and reduce the disproportionality as a family goes through the child welfare system. One of the other efforts that we are doing, and one that we've done collaboratively with juvenile justice, is approaching our reporting sources about disproportionality and giving them the understanding of institutional and structural racism as well.
Thanks, Angie. And there's actually another question, I think, related to CYF. So this question says, has mandated reporting had an impact on the number of Black girls being referred by CYF?
Absolutely. So in 2015, I think you all know that the child welfare laws in Pennsylvania have changed. It changed the definition of what child abuse is. It also changed who are mandated reporters. Since that change, we've seen our referrals have doubled. And with that doubling, we've seen an increase in disproportionality as well.
Thank you. And I think one more for you for now. Regarding child welfare, how stable are the kinship placements for Black girls? What services or programs support kinship care?
So I don't know the exact numbers on stability. I do know that our kinship placements tend to be the most stable of placements. I would have to get numbers. But a second chance kinship care provider provides a plethora of services for kinship care. They have mental health services, they have parent-child conflict resolution, they have a lot of services available.
Thank you. So this one says specifically, question for Kim Booth. Are there any talks?
Stand up, who are you?
Are there any talks regarding Black girls and women's criminal record not to continue to affect and have a huge negative impact on their future college education and future career and employment?
That was
So
a
let
lot
me
of
say
words,
this again.
Elise.
So conversations regarding Black girls and women's criminal record, so in a way that don't continue to affect and have a huge negative impact on their college and career and employment opportunities in the future. So, how do we mitigate that so that what happens as a juvenile doesn't affect those future outcomes?
Right, so we hope that it's a temporary space and time that they have to be involved in our system, right? And we want to look at if we can expunge your record, but we want to be able to move on with that process, always hoping that lives have changed, things have changed, and they don't have to continue to be involved in the system, but hopefully that they're a candidate for expungement.
Thank you.
And also, that's why we're working to have fewer referrals into the system so that we don't even have to do that work. Because we know that, and this is in the report too, right, that for the vast majority of referrals to juvenile justice, there are other options besides further involvement in the system that, yeah.
Okay, Sarah wants me to tell you, don't refer girls to our system.
Absolutely. So this is also a question for Juvenile Justice Work Group. Where or how can we get information on police involvement in schools, specifically a minor child being detained and denied access to their parents?
So I don't know if the question is exactly, so there's two kinds of information that I'm not sure which is being asked about. Sort of like if you are a parent and you need legal help, we have the Education Law Center here in Pittsburgh that if you have a specific case, I would recommend them. And we also have 2 law clinics at Duquesne University, an education law clinic there and a juvenile justice law clinic there. So for people that are dealing with, in their family or friends, these situations, like those are really good resources. In terms of learning more about the statistics and what's happening with the referrals, that's some of what's in our report. That's what we've been trying to do in the Juvenile Justice Work Group that we invite you all to join. We've been having meetings. We've had meetings with the Pittsburgh Police, with the Pittsburgh Public Schools Police, with district attorneys, with juvenile defenders, with the Pittsburgh Police data analysts, and we've been listening to them and asking them questions and trying to get a better understanding of what's happening so that we can figure out where are the places that we need systemic changes to stop these processes.
Thank you. So let me go back to child welfare. So question, can eliminating racial disparities in CYF staff have an impact on services for African American girls and children? And then there's a second question, what practices are occurring to change imbalanced staff ratios and discrimination?
So I'm going to say that the disparities that we're talking about are the number of staff of color as compared to white staff. And we are diligently recruiting to increase the number of our workers who are of color. What I can say is that through the research we see, the race of the decision maker does not really matter. The disparities are still there. I'm sorry, what was the second question?
What practices are occurring to change imbalanced staff ratios and discrimination? So you might have covered that.
That's it, yes.
Yeah, but, what I'm hearing you say is that regardless of the race, some of those disparities still exist. And so, we have to kind of dig a little bit deeper. Everybody who's just scanning, she can, y'all. So, question for education, and I think this will be our last one because we are over time. As we did with the Gender Equity Commission, we will take your questions, answer them all in written form, and send them out in our follow-up document. So, final question for you, Dr. Cross. When presented with the data that similar teen behaviors, black versus white girls, have yielded dramatically different outcomes, what has been the response from educators or school board officials?
I think, I can't speak for a lot of responses, I've only heard a limited number, but what I typically hear is excuses that the behavior is different, that the disparities are not caused by racism, they're caused by individual behavior, which is something that was raised earlier today, and also that they're trying to do something about it. Often it'll be something vague that's not supportive of students. What we see kind of more and more is in trying to alleviate student conduct problems, we're seeing more and more punitive measures be put in place as opposed to service supports. We're losing social workers, we're losing counselors out of schools, but we're gaining police officers. So I don't know that the proposed solutions are thinking realistically about the causes of disparities or realistically about the remedies.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. And like I said, feel free, if you have other questions, write them down. We will send out a written response. I know we're kind of tight, but if you do feel so compelled to move for lunch, you can find our co-conveners and sit at the tables with them. They'd be happy to continue those conversations.